let's get going. As property owners, facility managers, we have the responsibility to ensure that our facilities are safe. Our populations continue to grow. We continue to see more and more people accessing facilities, going to facilities, parking, walking. Age plays a pretty significant role in how we access facilities. So as our driving population gets a little bit older, not to mention as our driving population gets younger. So younger drivers tend to have a little bit of, maybe have a little more speed in their foot, and they want to get from point A to point B, maybe not as much patience. But we definitely need to look at this. And a new component to this, a new wrinkle, drivers need to relearn. We're actually seeing that drivers are forgetting how to drive. If you're not driving as much due to the COVID-19, you might have a little COVID-19 fog. So as our team members and our employees and our visitors are revisiting our facilities and coming back, we definitely need to be aware of issues that are coming up. So this is just a new added wrinkle. So you might ask yourself, what are some of your concerns at your facility? Each facility is a little bit different. Are you a destination facility, meaning are lots of people arriving to go to an event? Are you a office complex? Are you a commerce facility? So each person has their own little world that they're trying to work with, and you have your own concerns. So in your mind, just start thinking to yourself, what are my concerns? What are the concerns of our facility? I would tell you that anytime you have pedestrians and cars that are in the same space, or even cars and cars that are in the same space, is that you do have issues. You may not be aware of them, but that's going to be one of the things we're going to kind of look at today. Keep in mind, this, like we say, this is not a one-stop or a one-size-fits-all process. So each facility, each individual manager, you're going to need to be looking at things through your own lenses and figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and how best to implement improvements, how to do your evaluation. How do you get from point A to point B? Today we're going to take a quick walk through steps 1 through 3. We've kind of developed a 6-step process that we try to work with our clients, trying to help them get from where they're at to where they want to go. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And then once you reach the end of that point, you start the process over and have to relearn and review it. So today we're going to look through steps 1 through 3, which are evaluating existing conditions, implementing improvements, and then the communication and feedback. Communication and feedback is very important. Steps 4 through 6, which we will not necessarily touch on today, analytics. How effective have you been in your improvements? How effective have you been in identifying your conditions? Once you go through some implemented improvements, is there incremental change? And here's a big one. And we're seeing this now as team members are getting a little bit older, as team members are retiring. What we're seeing is that we're lacking some experience transfer. How do we get the knowledge and what's up in each individual's head to the next person or onto paper so that the next generation who's coming up behind us knows what we have done and can be ready to make improvements on it? So here's kind of a simple process chart that we use. It's fairly generic. We're going to look at existing conditions, implementing improvements, the communication and feedback as we talked about, analytics, planning, and management. Those are all forthcoming. Might be a second presentation of this series. But for right now, we're just going to concentrate on steps 1 through 3. And I'll tell you that steps 1 and 2 are actually fairly large steps, and they're going to take you some time. So let's get into the evaluate existing conditions. What's going on? Your existing conditions is going to likely include a whole handful of these scenarios here. We're going to have a data event review. So hopefully you have some databases that you can look at. You're going to take a look at, in a critical manner, you're going to take a look at your wayfinding, which is striping and signage. You want to look at your overall parking conditions. Do you have adequate parking? Do you have the parking in the right places? Where's your access points compared to your parking? Site lighting is very important. Here in the Midwest, we do run into some lighting issues in the winter. We have Arrive at dark and leave at dark. So that lighting is a very important thing to look at. Barrier-free parking. As our populations age, we need to have appropriate and adequate barrier-free parking. Hands-on review of pedestrian routes. I'm a big advocate of people going out and actually visiting and taking their walks with the pedestrians, parking in where they're parking and accessing the points of the buildings. Look at the parking review. Lots of you will have a security group. You can talk to the pedestrians that are on site, your own team members. You can talk to the drivers, see how they're doing. You may have buses and shuttles that are running. So you might have shuttle stops for some of your bigger hospitals or medical facilities. You might have to have buses and shuttles to have adequate parking. Continuous communication and improvement. There's a whole process here we'll talk about. So we're just going to jump into evaluating existing conditions, review of vehicle and pedestrian conflicts. You may have within your security group or your HR health and safety group, you may have a database that shows existing conflicts. Not sure that you're able to read this, but this is just a snippet from a different summary of incident report for a medical campus. And they take fairly copious notes whenever they have an incident or a near incident, in which case they're looking at where did the incident happen? What type of incident was it? Was it a pedestrian conflict? Was it a pedestrian vehicle? Was it a vehicle-vehicle conflict? And they'll even have some description as to what the occurrence was. So they're going to have they're generating their ongoing database of how and where incidents are occurring. You may say to yourself, well, we don't have anything like this, but it really wouldn't take much to start something. You don't have to have an elaborate database system. You don't have to have an elaborate computer system. You can just make this an Excel database system, and then you could even incorporate some geometric location data so that you can locate it on your campus. In this particular instance, there's even been some information provided as to how severe the incident was. Was it minor, major, someplace in between? What was the incident? Was it a near miss where a pedestrian was walking across a walk and a car turned a corner? And in this particular instance, we have review of a sign placement impeding driver's vision. Sometimes you'll get to a facility, you'll see that there's an excessive number of signs, and sometimes signs, vegetation, other things, light poles, may actually be in the vision or sight line of the driver when they're trying to make a turn. Another incident here that we talked about is that we had a pedestrian crosswalk, and we had one vehicle that stopped for the pedestrian, which you would expect. However, the vehicle behind that vehicle, the second vehicle, was unable to stop, and they actually ended up hitting the other vehicle on the back end of the bumper and causing a little bit of damage. So we looked at the overall scenario here. What happened? Well, there was a well-marked pedestrian route. The pedestrian was using the identified route. We had signage. The first vehicle did exactly what they were supposed to. It was the second vehicle, and they may not have been paying attention. They may have had another issue. So now you can come back in, and once you start these databases, you can actually start recording this information on top of aerial imagery, site CAD drawings, whatever version of database that you have available that you can actually start keeping this map. And you'd be amazed. As you start recording data, similar to this is just a snapshot of an existing facility. And I would ask that lots of you are probably working with SME on some of these facilities. So this is a map of a previous facility we worked on. You may recognize it. Please don't shout out what it is or that it's yours. But this is where we're keeping records, and we're trying to help our clients make improvements. So in this particular map, we've documented what each one of these issues were. We gave it a color coding, and we've given it a type. And then this is referenced back to the database. So this is just one simple method. Here's another one where you might have just a Google Earth image, and you could create a KMZ file with tags, and you can actually just start mapping your information through KMZ files. And then you could give it a color coded, and you probably cannot see it, but I'm going to tell you that within this particular map, we have some identified letters that basically will then link it back to our database, and we'll know exactly what the incident was, what type of incident it was, and the color coding obviously relates to how severe it was. Vehicle conflicts. So not everything in a parking lot is just a vehicle and a pedestrian. Sometimes you can have vehicle incidents. So there's another way that you can just start looking at the overall vehicle movement in relation to parking stalls, vehicle movement in relation to buildings, and you can start developing your own database, figuring out where you're having conflicts, and that'll then lead into our next step, which is to evaluate what the issues are once you have a database going. Parking capacity. Right now, you may look at your parking lot and say, well, geez, it's pretty lightly parked. We only have about a 45% parking capacity. But before this COVID thing went down, parking capacities were probably nearly full. Everybody was working. Everybody was in the office. You'd be surprised that having too few parking stalls can actually cause a little bit of stress. Think of yourself going to a doctor's office before COVID, and you're driving around the parking lot looking for an appropriate stall, and what you don't find is anything that's near, and all of a sudden you start finding that your eyes are wandering looking for parking stalls. So that can cause a little bit of a problem. You might want to look at your stall layout, 90-degree versus angle parking. Aisle width. Aisle widths, if you start getting your aisles too tight, then you're going to have people who are walking down them and the cars are getting closer. You get them too wide, you might find that your cars are driving too fast. So, I mean, there's some sweet points there. Clear vision areas for turns. Lots of congested facilities. Trees that are on islands, which many of your municipalities mandate. Well, as the trees are getting more mature, or the bushes are getting more mature, they actually can start obstructing your vision. Or you end up finding that you have to pull too far out into the intersection to see around it. Now the nose of your vehicle is out in a drive lane. That could cause a conflict. And maybe it's not a sideways collision between two vehicles, but maybe you nose out to see another vehicle driving too fast, veers around you, comes into oncoming traffic. I mean, things can happen pretty fast when you're driving. Stall count. Do you have enough spaces? Remember, we want to try to avoid the panic park situation. Do you have enough parking in the winter? We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in the Midwest. Not recently, but you can have snow pile up, so we'll talk about that. And ADA. So you'll have a minimum number of stalls based on the number of overall parking stalls you have in your parking lot, but that's the minimum. You may need more, and it's based on your facility type. You may need to go out and do a study. What's your percent occupancy of your current ADA stalls? What's your location of your ADA stalls? Is it in the right place to access the buildings? Have the buildings changed? Architects are changing buildings and access points all the time. Did the adjacent parking lot get improved or updated along with building improvements? Here's one that I really think is a great idea. Hands-on review of your pedestrian routes. Really think you should go out at the prime time of your facilities. Drive in, park with the rest of your team members in their lots, visit and try to look at every lot. Are there lots of cars waiting to turn in? Are there lots of cars waiting to get into a stall? Is it a mad dash rush around your facility trying to find a parking stall so that I can get in and be on time, meet my appointment, be at my next meeting? Do you have proper lighting? Dark spots, light spots? ADA barrier-free parking counts versus needs. I really think that's an important thing to do. Just because you meet the minimum standard doesn't mean that you've got the right number. Access points to the parking lot versus parking lot location or parking locations, as well as what does the route from the parking stalls to your building look like? Is it appropriate? Is it well documented? Is it guided? Do I know as a new visitor to your facility how to get to the right point of the building? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Go and walk, park, walk and talk with the pedestrians who are going in. Figure out what they see. What are their thoughts? Wayfinding, signing, and stripage. This is probably two of the more lower hanging fruit that we can take care of to clean up, make sure it's appropriate, make sure it's well planned, visible, not confusing, and provides proper guidance from a building to a parking lot to a building, even within a facility. Does the signage tell me where I need to go? Evaluation of condition, visibility is a must do each and every year. In Michigan, we have a lot of breakdown and wear of our striping, so you need to understand that your striping is going to need to be redone. You might have to put another coat down every couple of years. Even with that, you might have to realign or redo some of your striping, so this is the right time to do it, is to actually have a schedule of when striping is going to occur, back yourself up 6 months from there, and walk it and understand what is going on in your parking lots. Do I have correct pedestrian routes identified? Do I have any pedestrian routes identified? Am I just letting my folks wing it and figure out how to get from point A to point B on their own? And this is the time also, as you're working on this, is to what are the known conflict points? Now, this is going back and re-reviewing your reports, re-reviewing your drawings. Do I need to add stop bars, stop signs? So with signing and stripage, we're going to kind of take a quick peek and just kind of go through a good or just so-so scenario. In this particular parking lot, we have lots and lots of parking, fields of parking, drive lanes going every which way. The blue dots represent buildings that I might be going to. So I'd look at that and I'd say, is that good or just so-so? Well, parking stalls look very good. I don't see a lot of arrows. I don't see any pedestrian routes. This particular drawing does not necessarily show barrier-free locations. They may be painted in the field. That's unknown. But I would probably call this basically a so-so plan. Red dots here indicate where I know there's been pedestrian and vehicle conflicts based on recorded information. So now if I'm the manager of this facility, I'm looking at this saying, I do have conflicts. They're recorded. I know we have issues. I need to go look at that and see if I can't make some improvements. Some actual photos. Is this good or just so-so? Striping here looks pretty clean, looks pretty new. It's angled parking, so I have some one-way routes. I don't see any arrows, but okay. This is a local facility, so I would assume that the people coming here are probably accessing this all the time, are very familiar with it. So I'd probably call this good. Good or just so-so? The striping here is a little bit worn, but probably more concerning is down here in the lower left-hand corner where you see that angled striping coming up. That's actually a pedestrian route. So right now in this facility, this pedestrian route has stopped. Now, you can see there's some new paving going on in the background, so it's supposed to continue. But between the time that paving was done and when this picture was taken, I've brought my pedestrians to a standstill, and now they are, maybe looking at this saying, I don't know which way to go. Good or just so-so? The one on the left, very clear, very obvious pedestrian route. Coming across from the parking lot, you can see the truncated barrier-free dome here on the sidewalk closest to you. That one looks pretty good. The one on the right, again, I have a striped area for pedestrian route to cross this. But here's the difference. In the right-hand picture, we see that the curb and gutter where the pedestrians are coming into is a little bit beat up. There's some chuck holes, which happens in Michigan. We get it. But in this scenario, I'm basically asking my pedestrians to walk across the road in a designated location, and I'm kind of bringing them to a trip point or a hazard. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But something else that is hard to see here, but is happening, is that there's a very steep ramp as you get into the sidewalk, and there's a curb on the other side of it, which dead ends into a parking stall. In this scenario, my pedestrians have to come across my roadway, get across that curb and gutter, turn to their right, come parallel with the roadway, and then turn left again where that corner deterioration's at. So this is a little bit of a this is a little bit more cumbersome area to try to traverse for your pedestrians. Signing and stripage. Signing here looks pretty good. I got a stop sign, I have a stop bar, I have a pedestrian route that's there. I have some directional arrows for my parkers or drivers. This I think is pretty good. Good or just so-so? Well, you can see that there used to be an identified pedestrian route, but there were some improvements made here that have cut off the pedestrian striping. So in this scenario, it's just so-so. This pedestrian striping needs to be redone. You can see that there islands have been put in there to basically designate parking. We got stop signs. However, upper right-hand corner, you'll see that the stop sign is actually in the pedestrian walkway, so that needs to be relocated out of the pedestrian walkway. Good or just so-so? Lower left-hand corner, stop bar, clearly identified pedestrian striping, stop sign on a pedestal, and it even has a solar, it's a solar battery activated stop sign with flashers. You can't see it in the photo, but very obvious. It's easy to see that that is a very important stop area. And then turning our corner, we see that we have a nicely defined pedestrian route from there. Good or just so-so? The right lower left-hand photo, we have a double yellow line. We have a stop bar, stop sign, same type of stop sign. We have a right-hand yellow line that basically designates the edge of the roadway. That's pretty good. The double yellow line looks like it could be restriped. On the right-hand side, we have a little bit more striping. We have a pedestrian route. We have stop signs. We have one-way. Pretty good shape. Do we have clear signage? You know, this is a great attempt at making some improvements. We got a stop bar, stop stencil. We got a stop sign, speed limit. Again, the flashing stop. Solar powered, so it can work for a long period of time. The one thing that we have that could be somewhat confusing is we have the old signage that is behind it, and it has some wayfinding information on it as well. That needs to be removed. So I'd give this just basically a so-so until we get that cleaned up, and I'll tell you the stop sign, I'm sorry, the stop bar and the stop stencil will need to be redone. Snow storage. Here's a problem that we see in a lot of smaller parking lots or areas that don't have a lot of area to put snow, is that they'll pack, the snow plows will come in very, very early in the morning. They'll pack it up into a corner. They may cover up an island such as this. They may have some that spills out into the parking stalls. What we have here, though, is it's spilled out not only in the parking stalls, but in the drive lane and the exit lane from this parking lot. And there's another travel lane that's on the outside of this, is that anybody who's coming up here cannot walk across the sidewalk that is actually buried underneath that snow. So we have some work to do before anybody can go across that. And here, what we find too is as you pack up the snow, is that as it melts, you're going to have water coming across your parking lot, and then at night it's going to refreeze, and then in the early morning, if you don't get out early enough and salt it, now you're going to have an area where you have ice, which is could be an issue for pedestrians. Site lighting. In Michigan, we do find ourselves coming to work in the morning. It's dark. When we go home at night, it's dark. We talk about it. We need to know if our site lighting on site is appropriate for the facilities we have. Do you know what levels you currently have? Are they in compliance? Do you have industry standards for your facility? And if you do, what are they? And is it in compliance? You can consult the Illuminating Engineering Society for current standards. Contact a local MEP engineering firm or a supplier. They'll provide a study for you of your current conditions. Perform your, here's an easy one. Do your own self-review. Drive around your facilities. Turn off your headlights if you can, and just see if you can find dark and bright zones. So you might say to yourself, well, a bright zone's not a big deal. But if any of you have driven on roads that have a tunnel, is you come out of a bright sunshine into a dark condition, and then go back out to a bright, your eyes have a hard time readjusting. And that actual couple seconds of your eyesight readjusting from a dark to a light to a dark can actually impede how you're viewing the space in front of you in your vehicle. So definitely want to look at that. Consult with your security division. Do they have known issues? Do they have known, I would say, locations where they know they have dark spots that are I don't know if I'd use the word unsafe, but areas that they say, hey, people shouldn't park in at night or they need to be careful of. There's another place where you could create a database, map your facility, just put some circles around areas and say, we need to look at lighting here. Cross-reference that with your pedestrian and your vehicle maps that we talked about earlier. If you have the capabilities and you can create layered GIS systems, you can put all this stuff into one database and call it out on different layers and bring your layers on or off or turn them on or off so that you can see, are there now things that are commonality between your different conflicts. Again, site lighting. So this would just be a snapshot of a photometric plan. Your MEP contractors, your manufacturers, with the right information, they can do these on a computer model and generate for you what your actual lumens are for your parking lot and give you a photometric plan. And mathematically, that'll tell you where you're at. But that's mathematically. Maybe some of the fixtures aren't performing as well as they would mathematically. Maybe some of the fixtures are 20 years old. So again, I would tell you, go out, walk the facility, know what it looks like. If all the folks are parking in the middle 2 aisles here and walking up to the building, that's probably fine. But how about the periphery? Does the periphery parkers, do they have this adequate lighting to get to where they're going? If you walk and drive it, you may know. What is working well? You do see a lot of these illuminated stop signs, the blinking stop signs now. They are readily available at most of your sign suppliers. They're a little more expensive, but boy, I'm going to tell you, they really capture the attention of both your pedestrians as well as your drivers. I think it's a very good idea to at least consider a few of those, especially in areas that you might have some conflicts, or you know that you're having people that are having trouble stopping at the appropriate time. Pedestrian crosswalks. I really think we should incorporate your pedestrian signs. They're fairly inexpensive. You can replace them. This particular one is a school one, but you can get the ones that are general for pedestrian routes. These are very easy to purchase and install. In fact, you can, if you have a contract with a striping contractor, you can readily have them purchase them and install them as part of your overall program, your asset management program and your evaluation program. So it's something that you don't have to do. You just have to identify it and decide where do you want to do it and have somebody else install it as part of a program. Upper right-hand corner photo, this is that same parking lot. It's been changed. This is a little bit different layout. We've changed it to some angled parking to give ourselves some one-way lines. We have lots of arrows indicating directions, and you will see, because this particular site had an abundance of pedestrian traffic that moved between buildings and across roads and through parking lots, is we added quite a bit pedestrian routes to help them identify what the route is, where to go, how to walk across these sites, to try to minimize the conflicts that we have and how to get our people from one building to another with the least opportunity to get in the way of another vehicle. What could be improved? Upper left-hand corner, complete your striping and redo it. Upper right-hand corner, extend the pedestrian walkway. Get them from the parking lot to the building. Restripe so that it's fresh. Lower left-hand corner, redo your stop bar, stop stencil, clean up your signage. Right-hand corner, I think that's in pretty good shape. I may consider, there's a sign with a concrete pedestal that's in the painted out area, is maybe just moving that a little bit more interior to that island so that when somebody comes around that corner, they don't catch it with their car or their tire. Additional resources. We're all have a finite amount of time that we can deal with this plus our other everything that's on our schedule. So how about some suggestion box? Do you have any in place around your facility? Put a few around. Maybe make one of the items on that, what could we improve? And put a line item in there that says parking, wayfinding, signs, lighting, more ADA. Through your process and your own review, you should have 3 or 4 tick items that you say, these need to be done. We should at least look at it further. Review social media about your facility. People aren't hesitant about lambasting you on social media. I mean, you got something wrong, they're going to get after you. So you know what? Be the one who's actively looking for that and respond to them. Ask them for further input. People might feel pretty engaged if they feel like there's been a problem and you ask them to help. Your security group, always a valued resource. They know what's going on probably as much or more than anybody. Query the pedestrians, query the drivers. Buses and shuttles. So there are some facilities where there is just not adequate parking, and putting up a 4-floor parking deck to replace a flat lot is really not an option. Well, it could come to the point where you have to put in buses and shuttle stops to bring people from an off-site location to your facility. Continuous communication and improvement. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll take, if we have any questions, we'll take a quick 2 minutes to answer any questions.
Tony, I'm wondering who from my organization should be in that initial evaluation that you mentioned.
All right. The question came up as who from my organization should be involved in the initial evaluation process. So there's not a right answer for that. It really depends on the size of your organization, the size of your facility, how complex is your facility, what are your resources. If you're working in a single site development that's one building with a parking lot that's got a lot of frequent turnover, I would probably recommend that you bring the facility manager or the office manager into communication. If there's a facilities team that's off-site that manages the parking lot for your organization, I would probably identify the correct person from that organization. I might limit that to like 2 or 3 people initially. If it's a much larger organization, much larger facility, then possibly even identifying the head of security, the head of health and safety, possibly even an HR representative who may have received complaints. So I would say initially, you as the facility manager, you have to lead this. You have to take the charge. You have to identify the people that you want as part of your team. If you get the response that we have no conflicts, we have no issues, everything is perfect, that's great. Now your process is to evaluate the overall condition of your facility, and is it providing the safety that you expect and your clients and team members expect when they arrive, go to the building, do their job, do their appointment, and then leave to go home. Is it safe? Is it correct? That's really going to be upon the facility manager. As you identify further and larger issues or more extensive concerns, that's when your team would grow. Yep, thanks for the question. Any other questions? All right, let's move on. All right, so that's task 1. Task 1's a pretty big task. That's going to take you a little bit of time depending on how big your facility is. Implementing improvements. As the facility manager, you should have in your mind a general schedule of when you perform site improvements, site infrastructure evaluations, when are projects or capital improvements, when are O&M type projects coming up, how are those going to impact my facility? So you have to be very familiar with how you operate the facility and what's coming towards your facility. These are the perfect times to start dovetailing in improvements. If somebody says, you know what, we're going to do a sidewalk replacement program this year. Wow, what a great time to get all of your ADA reviewed. Take a look at all your barrier-free stalls. Are your grades correct? These are all the things that are really necessary to create a system or an area that is serving your clients and your team members correctly. What was identified in the review of the existing conditions? Probably during this process, we didn't necessarily review catch basins and concrete collars. However, if we know that we have concrete and other repairs coming in, let's get those taken care of. Let's dovetail some improvements to striping and signage and barrier-free locations. Let's make sure that those are all correct. Simple and inexpensive fixes. Any low-hanging fruit. We talked a little bit about striping and signage. Signage is a little more expensive. I get it. You have to order it, you have to get it delivered, you have to install it. Striping, that's pretty low-hanging fruit. You should be looking at striping probably every 2 years at most facilities. I mean, things get wore out. So every 2 years, you should be reevaluating your striping. Here's a great idea. As you understand your facility, put parking lots and roads in different areas in a rotation so that you're only biting off 1/5 of your facility every 2 years to restripe and improve. Now you have a rotational improvement program. And if anybody ever comes to you and says, what is your corporate process for evaluating and making sure things are safe and very visible? Well, here is my process. It's a 2-year program. I look at 1/5 of my facility every year. Any issues that we get that are identified as a hot priority, we will probably look at those immediately. But you now have a process. It's a defendable process. Anything in the core law is a different story, but at least you have a process, something that you can say, this is what we do. In this particular image, striping, sign cleanup, pedestrian way. We talked about this site, just so. All the red dots representative vehicle, pedestrian conflicts. This is based on our database. This is based on information provided to us from our team members. We did a large infrastructure project at this facility. What a great time to now basically expand on the parking and striping layout plan for this facility. Identified things to make it safer, slow the vehicles down, help the pedestrians know where they're going. And you'll notice there are parking stalls everywhere here. So wherever you park, you have pretty good access to the building you're going to. And why is that important? We talked a little bit about it earlier, is that if I arriving at a site late or in a hurry, or I'm on my phone, which I shouldn't be, if I'm looking for stalls and I'm looking 2 rows over, I'm not likely looking right directly in front of me where a pedestrian's popping out from between 2 cars, because they're also late to a meeting and they're boogieing along. So more parking, adequate parking, signage, striping. Are the routes to the building clearly marked? Once my pedestrians are in the lot, do they know how to get to where they need to go? Well, you start putting down the striping for pedestrian ways, they're going to know exactly where they need to go. Maybe even include some signs that say one way. So vehicles are only going one way. They're looking for the pedestrians. They know which way they're going. It kind of breeds a point of being familiar with the site. And here's something that we haven't talked about, but another great idea is somehow, as the facility manager, you understand your facilities. You live and breathe them. Is that what you find that works? And we'll talk a little bit about that, about implementation management, is start to try to drive that between facilities. And what you're going to have is now you have some redundancy or some general items that are going facility to facility to facility. And as your team members and people who are accessing your facilities, they start to understand when they see this is what is expected of them. So improvement. The one thing left-hand photo here is that we have a sign that is in the middle of our barrier-free walkway. So that sign needs to be moved. A cautionary tale: by having pedestrian routes clearly defined, you may need to perform a different study, and that's called slips, trips, and falls. Because once you tell everybody this is where we expect you to walk, you also have to make sure that that route is safe. Now, that said, your entire parking lot has to be safe. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you put them in a designated area, that better be spot on. So that's a completely different topic, and maybe a future web series. Feedback. We talked a little bit about knowledge transfer and feedback. You've gotten some feedback from your team. You know what is not working. You know where you have conflicts. You know where the things are that need to be changed. Well, let's communicate that to the other facility managers. Let's communicate that to the other building owners that are in your complex. The improvements that we discussed. Did the improvements provide effective relief of that condition? So this is where, again, it's about record keeping. GIS systems are great for this, but it can be simple as, again, Google Earth, KMZ, and Excel files. What improvements were completed? When were they completed? What did it include? How much did it cost? Who did the work? It's good to have these records so that, number one, in 2 years, when you go back to relook at that area, if you have to do any other improvements, you got the information. And two, if you're not there tomorrow, do you have an adequate database, an adequate resource for the person who's going to come in and sit in your chair to pick up where you're at and to take your legacy to the next level? We really need to work on that. People are retiring. I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but we need to work on data transfer. We need to work on transferring our experiences to the person who's taking over for us. Why were they completed? Again, this is just about having another column in your database to tell you this is why it was done and this is what was completed. Get feedback. Again, go walk with your pedestrians, go drive it yourself, talk to security. Were the improvements completed adequate? I'm going to tell you that not always the first round what you do is going to be enough. So that comes into an incremental improvement and continuous improvement program. So in 2 years, when you go back to revisit that lot and do it again, what can we do just a little bit better? Here's one that we kind of forget about is big changes. When we do some big changes or something that is very much different, we need to roll that out as a communication to the people who are accessing those lots, the people who are using them, our facilities team, because now we have rolled out something that is changing the way people have perceived or used something for a period of time. And I don't know about you, but what I see is change for people is hard. So let's help to inform them to like lower that hurdle of change. Was there an impact on safety? Did the safety team or the HR team provide you any feedback? Here's one. What improvements, what problems are still out there and what improvements can we still complete? Hopefully at this point, after your first round, you've already taken care of the low-hanging fruit and you've identified the red areas. Let's move to the orange areas. Let's keep going. Continuous improvement. We're not going to get into this too far. These are the next modules, 4, 5, and 6, but analytics. This is where you're actually monitoring the improvements. So you would have a database. We talked about a database, but can you identify if the improvements you completed have been successful in what you're trying to reduce or eliminate in the conflict? So now you can start looking at the analytics of your improvements. And now you can even start looking at cost benefit. What's the cost of benefit of restriping, new signage, pedestrian ways? These are all the things as the facility manager that you can start looking at and start understanding. Planning. What are the next incremental changes? We talked about basically kind of breaking things up into 20% areas or 1/5 of your facility. That's just a number. It's a 5-year. I typically like to look at things in like 5-year windows and 5-year periods. It just seems to work, and mathematically 20% is an easy number because it's 2 times 10. And it's easy for people to understand that if I have $100,000 worth of maintenance to do every 5 years, well, that means this year I get to do 20,000. Wait, is that correct? 100,000 times 20? Yeah, 20,000. Just checking. But it's easy. Experience transfer. We talked about this. Experience transfer kind of floats on 2 sides of the same area, is that we want experience transfer within our facilities and across facility managers. Best, kind of like best scenarios, what worked, what didn't, have open communication. But it's also about driving this to a long-term management. And that's the people that are coming in beneath you, and extending this to a longer-term solution. Until we figure out a way for people to teleport from their home to a business or a building, I'm not sure that we can eliminate the vehicle pedestrian conflicts in parking lots. So as soon as somebody develops that teleporter, we'll all be out of business. Again, management. As a corporate, you could start establishing corporate guidelines, corporate details, standards, and goals, and start establishing what each facility is going to look like. And you could start driving that through all your facilities, both, you know, at a single time and then through history, and then make improvements on this. So you start generating what you want your facility to look like, and then take that across all your facilities, and people will start to understand, and they'll change their behavior, and they'll understand what your goals are. And you've given tools for the facility managers to implement this. So they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're using a wheel that's already rolling, and they just say, let me divert that wheel over here and get going. Slips, trips, and falls. That's a larger identification process and management. And like I say, it is a different program. We're not going to get into that today, but maybe I'll yak with Kristen over here and see if maybe that couldn't be a future web series, because that's a different animal. And once you start down that path, now you have a different set of criteria you need to use. You have different constituents that you have to satisfy. So that's a little different program. So maybe you walked away from this and said, we do all that. We're on it. We're spot on. In fact, we do more. We got this and that. We got photos that represent good condition, bad condition, and we transfer that to, that's fantastic. Figure out a way that you can make that a long-term vision and how to drive that across all your facilities. Some of you might look at this and said, you know what? I might try the evaluation thing and just kind of just drive around, walk around, look at things and see how things look. That's a great start. Anything. The phrase I use is just start. Pick one thing and start. Go make some notes. Just go drive your parking lots and go, striping looks great, or striping could use a redo. When's our next striping contract coming up? With that, we'll open it up to another round of questions. And if you have any questions you want to email me, there's my email address. And Kristen, I think you mentioned something about CEUs, so I would let you jump in on that.
Yep, thank you, Tony. That was a great presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We'll give it just a second here for questions, and I'll get to the CEU. If any of you are interested in a continuing education certificate, please email me with the request directly, and we'll get that taken care of and off to you in the next week or so. I will also have a recording of today's session that I will share with all of the registrants, so keep an eye out for a link to that as well. And Tony mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning, this is actually the second session in a series of webinars that SME is hosting through the fall here. So stay tuned on social media for registration information for the next session, which is the third Tuesday in August. And we'll be talking again about drones and FWD for asset management. It doesn't look like there are any questions, so we'll go ahead and end today's webinar. Again, thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future sessions. Thanks, everyone.